It is an honor at the James Cook University in Singapore especially to welcome the very much well-respected and recognized Mr. Mike Pondsmith. It's yours.
Okay, well, if we close the doors so I get you all locked in so you can't escape, I'm going to talk about something near and dear to my heart because as you guys know, I'm doing a lot of work in IP right now with our project Cyberpunk, and it's an interesting child, Cyberpunk 2077. So I thought rather than trying to answer all the questions everybody does about what's going to be in 77 I can't answer yet because they'll kill me if I do, I figured I'd tell you how we get there and some stuff which I think is going to be really applicable to all of you designer types in your future careers, okay? I have notes up right now. To be really honest, I don't usually do anything like PowerPoint. I hate PowerPoint, as any of my old students can tell you. But when you're in class, you have to do that. So I'm going to be talking to you a few things here. Mostly you can kind of ignore this because I'm just going to use it as notes, okay? So we're going to be talking about the idea of transitions, how you take a video game, how you make it work in other mediums, books, TV, radio. Yes, I've seen stuff done on radio for video games. It's really weird. Books, everything out there. We don't live in a single media world anymore. We live in a media world that is always interconnected. All of it works with everything else. As a friend of mine in the business said many years ago, you want to have the whole end cap to yourself. Okay, so that means when you start thinking about a game you're doing, you need to think about how it applies to a lot of different places. Because if you don't, then what you're going to have is a game that can't travel very well. Likewise, invariably, some of you, particularly in the beginning of your careers, are going to end up having to adapt something that somebody else wrote. And it may be a video game, but more often as not, it's a book or a movie or a comic. And you're left trying to figure out, what's interesting about this? Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes the project that you'll have to adapt is perfect for video games or just games in general. For example, Talsorian, a bunch of years back, did Dragon Ball Z as a tabletop game. And I couldn't pass it up because Toriyama actually gave us some advice on it. And I learned secrets I can't tell you now, but it is actually Kamehameha, okay? He told me that. But the upshot was because Toriyama did video game design work, a lot of the elements of Dragon Ball Z are very, very video game friendly. And they're also game friendly. So you may not get that lucky. We got lucky a few times. But we're going to talk about how you get there from A to B. And after we go through about, I'd say 45 minutes or so, I'm going to open things up to questions. And as students, you guys better have questions. I'm warning you. I pick people out of the audience. My students hated that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the issues of working with intellectual properties, okay? What they are, how they work, okay? What sort of things you need to know to deal with them, and also what mediums go best with other media. So to do that, we need to take a look at the bits and pieces that make up an IP, okay? Anybody who isn't familiar with the idea of an IP, it's called an intellectual property, okay? Everybody more or less know that idea? Okay, who doesn't know what an intellectual property is so I can quickly pick them out of the audience? Okay, so the thing is, we live in a time because there's so much mass media where intellectual property is the most valuable thing that you can create. When you are designing your games, you're going to need to think about how much you control that. Does your studio control it? Do you control it? Is it creator controlled? Because that's where the money is. For a typical company piece I might do, we'll make a fairly big chunk, couple million out of it or whatever in a given year. But I can make that in 60 seconds or more, 10 times that, signing a contract for that intellectual property. That's where that money is. That's where you end up discovering how far you can go with this stuff. With me so far? Okay, so intellectual property is basically ideas. It's stories, it's characters. It's the stuff that people build bad fan fiction out of. Oh, that's interesting. I already know this. I mean, you know, I don't really have to do this. You kids, I swear. Technology. Okay. So it means I'm going to have to actually stay here instead of pacing around, which is kind of a pain, but we'll get there. Okay. So the thing with intellectual properties is they get a life of their own, and they can travel to different places. They can go to different medias, okay? For example, if you look at Avengers, Avengers is a movie, but it's also comic books. And now it's books, and now it's action figures, and now it's TV, and now it's board games and card games and so forth. And each one of those media changes around. You have to have different ways of dealing with it. So we're going to explore a little bit on that, okay, and knowing how you deal with those. Okay. The thing about how they work is that ideas are mutable. They're like memes. A meme is basically an IP that no one claims. So you're dealing with a thing that's part of people's dreams, part of people's ideas, how they see a particular idea or property, what they place value in on it. So that means that it's not just simply, yeah, I want to do this, but how do I take it in a form that is best and strongest for it, okay? So a lot of that's going to come down to licensed properties, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ones I've had to deal with and the issues, and then we'll also talk about both good things that happen out of that and bad things that happen out of that, because as designers and developers, you will see all of these possibilities, and sometimes it works, sometimes it's great. Other times it's, oh my God, what were they thinking? You know, for example, wrestling games work really, really well. But I was amazed to find a couple of years ago one of the best-selling titles was a Kim Kardashian dress-up game. So there you are at E3, right? And you're like, E3, all these really great games. Everyone's around the Kim Kardashian dress-up booth. And I'm like, go to my friend who's working there, and he's going, yeah, we're making money hand over fist, man. Everyone wants this game. I never thought that in a million years. Okay. Obviously, I need to watch more TV. Okay, so let's jump down to the first level of this. What's a licensed property? Okay, you're going to have to work with these. They are something where somebody else owns the IP, and they're going to be coming to you, or they've been approached by you, if it's your company, to do a game based on that. So here's a couple interesting things about that. Why do people want to take their IPs to other places? Part of it is that there's a pyramid of importance. And one of the few visual aids I'm going to have today, I call it the pyramid of media importance. And it begins with the highest level, movies and TV. Not a lot of movies and TV, relatively speaking, to the billions of books, comics, and other things out there, right? The next level down is video games. Okay, video games used to be under comics. They were not as important. They were not as visual. They did not command the same sort of money and licensing value. But that has changed a lot. So it's important to realize that these structures change. You know, you may start off and go, yeah, I'm doing a comic book, and everybody went, whoa. Now it's like, I'm doing a video game. Whoa. Okay. When we decided to hook up with CDPR, Cyberpunk had been licensed by a lot of different companies who didn't really come through on that. But we made a lot of interesting money on projects they didn't finish. Part of it was they didn't know what to do with it, and that was a licensing problem. Some of you guys may invent a license or an idea or an IP and have to translate it to another form. I have a really, really great video game, but how do I take Minecraft and make it into something that can be used as a book? or Minecraft, the movie. And before you laugh, Hasbro, for example, does G.I. Joe and Transformers. G.I. Joe and Transformers, even My Little Pony, can be easily translated into other forms of IP. Try that with Battleship. Yeah, you laugh. They did Battleship. Okay. But you got to imagine it. So, you're sitting around the meeting. So, we're going to do Battleship. All right. So, what's the basic idea? Well, battleships shoot at each other. Yeah, that's good for 10 minutes. Okay. Anybody got any ideas? Well, let's do a really bad love affair and tack that in, and we'll have the old thing about the guys in trouble with the admiral's daughter, and that's how you get movies like that, because somebody was going, it sounds like a great idea, we can make money, but they didn't know how to make it work. And if you're in a position, as I have been, of having something like that, you may like what they come up with, you may hate what they come up with. Trust me, you can occasionally look and, oh my God, you want to do that with my baby? No. Okay. So video games are rising fast. Comics are now below video games in terms of value, let's say, importance in the pyramid. Battleship, remember Battleship? If you can reach all the way up to the top of that, it's very few, but the value is that you reach a bigger audience. Okay, and that's what you want. The more butts you put in a seat, the better the property, because people will see it. And for those of you who are not interested in making money, you can leave now. Those of you who are not interested in making money, it's still important because you want people to see what you made. You want to be able to say, be sitting in the audience and go, yeah, that's mine up there. I did that. That was cool. It's why we do this. So if it gets up to a movie or TV, that's a lot of people. Forget the money. The money is nice, but that's a lot of people who will see what you do. If you get a video game, where we come in now, that's pretty cool. But you'd like to get that TV show or that movie, right? I don't think anybody, would complain about things like Witcher getting a TV show. And I'm pretty sure if we got a Cyberpunk movie, you guys would be okay with that. I would be. So you want to reach audience. So the pyramid is that there's more of it, but its absolute value in terms of audiences is smaller and smaller and smaller. You got it. For example, you're doing Harry Potter. A lot of people read Harry Potter, but most people didn't. And it took a while for people to discover it and have it reach out more and become a larger property. But to be really honest, Harry Potter went ballistic when it jumped up into movies and TV, because then huge audiences saw that stuff. They saw that concept. They saw Harry and what he looked like and all that. We're going to talk a little more about that. Everybody with me so far? Okay, nobody wants to throw anything yet or stop me? Okay, you're in here for the long ride. You got 47 more minutes. Okay, so when you're dealing with that, when you're dealing with an intellectual property, let's start at the baseline of it. Each of the places it comes into vary depending on who they can reach and how often they can reach them, what their inherent value is, but it's also the ease of conversion for an idea. Some ideas work really well. Some ideas are really, really tough. So you have to ask yourself on an IP, does it have the legs to go to other mediums? Some ideas work great in a book but make a terrible movie. For example, Starship Troopers. It's a classic, okay? Every, young person I knew, at a certain point, read Heinlein and read Starship Troopers, and they're all walking around going, yeah, I understand that. But it makes a terrible, terrible movie. And I remember Ed Neumeyer, who did the screenplay for it, I was talking to him one night, and he said, yeah, my problem was that most of Starship Troopers is Robert Heinlein talking about the philosophy behind that world. It's not about people landing and fighting bugs. So, I'm saying, so what did you do? And he said, well, for starters, I decided I was going to focus on that one small love story idea. And the next thing we know, we had kind of Archie, Veronica, and Betty go into outer space and kill bugs. Well, that didn't do the best for Starship Troopers, but they made money. People kind of went, what the heck? But they had a terrible adaptation. Another one would be like Atlas Shrugged. A lot of people in philosophy class, whatever, read it, and A friend of mine once, who was more masochistic than I will ever be, once sat down and recorded the entire John Galt speech in the tail end of the book, where he talks about the philosophy of objectivism, whatever. And he said, yeah, 4 hours later, reading at a moderate speed. Now, can you imagine that? You know, you're sitting in a theater 4 hours later. Am I dead yet? No. So some things don't adapt well. Other things, like Dragon Ball, they're made to be done in games. They're made to be done in comics. But the creator, in this case, knew the other areas he was going to want to take his piece, and he built those things into the IP. So when you are thinking of a video game you're working on, particularly if you're directing the IP, you should also be thinking, how is this going to adapt somewhere else? You know, am I making Minecraft and I have no real story behind that? So when they want to make the movie, how do they make that movie? You know, how will I adapt my idea and my concept to go to other places? And I'm not connected. Okay, that was fun. I don't even need that. Will you quit messing up? I'm warning you, man. I will throw you out. Okay. So, some IPs also naturally scale, and they're more precious and smaller. They're more precise, they're more personal. So they may fail when you expand them to a larger scale. For example, one of my favorite is Cats. How many people have seen Cats on movies, whatever? 3 people have seen Cats. Yeah, well, that sort of tells you something, doesn't it? So Cats was originally a little poem written many, many years ago by a British writer, and everybody liked it. And they said, gee, what if we do kind of a little poem about it, maybe some dance, and a little interpretive dance. Next thing we know, the thing is this enormous production with 15 million songs and hundreds of people dressed badly as cosplay cats. And, memories, kill me now. So what happened? Well, that was really small, but there wasn't a lot to take a well-loved thing and hang effectively a movie on it. So when you're looking at an IP, you have to find out how well does it scale as well. Can it scale? It's going to have to go to many places if you want it to be successful, if you want to make that transition. So that's another thing you're going to have to take into your creation. You don't want it to kill your game, but in the back of your head, you should be thinking about it. You should be thinking, how are they going to do this if we do get a movie deal? How are they going to do this? For example, with Cyberpunk, inadvertently, because it creates characters, I created people like Johnny Silverhand. But Johnny got created because I told the story as a story. So it was a book, and it was a character that meant that somebody could jump on it and say, yeah, okay, this guy seems kind of interesting. And his relationship to his girlfriend is kind of interesting. And somebody could later look at it, as I'm sure you guys will all do later, and ship the living daylights out of it. I'm already seeing Johnny Silverhand in alt, fan pictures. By the way, you have no idea how scary it is to look at something you've done. You're just like, 2 a.m, yeah, I think I'll give him a silver hand. And then years later, Keanu Reeves with a silver hand, and everybody going, oh, that's so awesome. You're going, if I known this was going to happen, I would have thought this out better. I would have done more with this character. But we were lucky. I designed a character that could be taken up from a personal level to a larger scale. A lot of people who work in video games and games aren't doing that. They've got a mechanic, but they're not going, hey, what will happen with that mechanic? Sometimes it's like, you have Mario, right? Mario, everybody knows Mario. Mario does not make a really good movie. He makes a kind of even weaker comic. He makes a great video game. I don't think there are any Mario books out there that I've seen, maybe in Japan, but I haven't seen them. There are Mario board games, but a lot of what you do in a lot of those Nintendo games doesn't translate really well to other mediums. Okay, so I jump 3 squares and I land on a Koopa. It doesn't work too well. Okay, so again, when you're dealing with an IP, think about that. Think about what you will do or what's going to happen when somebody shows up on your doorstep and says, yeah, I want you to do my video game. Or even when you are assigned the task of going out and finding out whether something will make a good game. And when I was at Microsoft, I had that as one of my jobs. We actually worked in a group called, I ran a group called Intellectual Properties, which is why I know this speech. So, we went out and said, oh, yeah, this would be pretty good, and this would be useful, this character will work, and that's not immediately instinctive to people. Okay, so when you look at the IP, you also have another thing you have to look at, and that is your audience, okay? And this is where I get to step out for half a second, because we're going to talk about the Venn diagram, game Venn. You guys are all college students, so you should know what a Venn diagram is. Everybody confused? Everybody failed that part of math? Okay. Well, a Venn diagram is important because it shows the actual interactions of one or more things. Okay, so one of my favorite on this is this Venn diagram looking at how medias get used, okay? And we're going to look at this again, but what you're looking at is two things. One, where it sits and where your audience will be, okay? For example, the people who get into TV and movies, they don't necessarily get into books. They don't necessarily, my son loves, movies and video games, but, I have to beat Cody over the head to get him to read anything that isn't a weapons manual on, great weapons of the Viking Age, Want to read some fiction? Why? Really, dude, some fiction? No, it's not real. So TV and movies have a somewhat different audience. We're going to talk about how that works in a minute. Comics and video games have a certain different audience. So, for example, one of the first things everyone realized was that, you kind of put all of us geeks in the same box with we read comics and we play video games. That's a natural. It's a certain sort of way in which they interact with that property, with that IP. Okay? Books and games, and when I mean games, I mean tabletop. Books and games are different because the people who read the books aren't necessarily going to be interested in the TV show or the comics. So in the middle of all that, you have to find a sweet spot, which is what a Venn diagram is about, is where things cross and work really well, okay? And if you figure that out, you've got something pretty slick, but you need to figure it out, okay? And when you look at that, it tells you something. And this is going to be something important when you're designing even beyond the limits of an IP. What is going to happen with your audience? What's your audience looking for? You don't do this in a vacuum. You don't sit around and say, yeah, but it's a brilliant idea for a video game that I only want my mother to see. Yeah, you're not going to make a living doing that. As a note, I was in this business for 10 years, had a company, hired a lot of people, made a fair amount of money, and my mother kept saying, when are you going to get a real job? So congratulations, guys. You now actually are in a business where your parents will think you can make money and make a living at it. We fought hard for you, okay? You can thank us now. Okay. Us pioneers, Yay. Anybody want to leave $1 for me? I'm good for that. Okay. But when you're looking at it, what did they like about the original IP, okay? So if we're jumping back to that Venn diagram, for example, if I'm looking at a movie, I'm looking at a lot of visual that's fed to me. I get story, but I don't affect that story. Nobody get in the middle of Avengers says, oh, man, no, that character shouldn't die. I'll just go back to the other ending. No, you're on for the ride. If you did that in a video game, people would go, wait a minute, I'm on a rail. That sucks. I didn't sign up to do Avengers the Rail Shooter. Okay, not happening. So TV and movies are what are called hot media, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Comics and video games are more interactive. One reason is with comics, you have to invest in the stories, the characters, the art. You have to know many, many things about that media to enjoy it. You even have to understand how comics work so that you can say, well, that panel sucked. Why the heck is Tony Stark over there doing this when he's talking to somebody there? You have to have a knowledge, okay? And a video game, you have to know it. You have to be able to play it. You interact with it. You make choices. You basically move that media towards what's called cold media, media where there's a greater investment by the person consuming that media. So see, we're taking a media class too, right? So yeah, this will count for double credits in your scores. Okay, books and games are very cool. And not just because they're cool, but basically they're cold or cool media. And the reason is that they take the largest amount of investment from your audience. Your audience, in many cases, has to make the story up around Battleship, in their heads at least. In books, they have to imagine Harry Potter. They have more to fill in, so their interactivity is higher. And they really need to stay on that, okay? So here's the problem. When you're doing that, if I, for example, picked up Harry Potter, I'm used to a whole lot of people who are going to be wanting to see stuff they saw in their own heads. This was their headcanon because they did the work to get there. If I'm doing, so I'm doing a video game, it's got to sort of, Hogwarts has got to look a certain way. And it's got to look the way that people who were invested, that audience, saw it. Close enough, at least, to where people don't go, oh, man, they screwed it up. I'm never seeing that again, okay? So you ask yourself a couple questions. One is, what did they like about the original IP? What was the thing that they got into? When people looked at Harry Potter, did they imagine themselves going to Hogwarts? Were they, consumed just the story? Did they feel like they could be part of that in some way? Were they hot or were they cold? Okay. They didn't need to have a lot of flash. On the other hand, when you go up to a movie, everything's laid out for you. You know what these characters look like. You know what their storylines are. So the person who consumes that wants things to be faithful to one interpretation that isn't the one in their heads necessarily. So, case in point, we all know what Luke Skywalker looks like, right? Okay. Does anybody have an idea of what, like the brown-haired, green-eyed Luke Skywalker who's a girl? Yeah, well, when Lucas did that originally, Luke Skywalker was going to be a girl. So think that one over, kids, now that you're really confused. But we have one interpretation. That's what we move forward on. So when you're looking at that and you're writing your game to go to an IP, you're going to have to find out, why did they come to this thing in the first place? Did they want to read a book? Did they want to see something they saw, on a screen? Did they want to get something that felt like a comic that they saw over and over again? Men in Black, for example. Men in Black was a comic book, but they did a great job of interpreting the comic book and getting the kind of weird, goofy qualities so that it worked. Everybody with me so far? Okay, occasionally like yawn or something, let me know you're out there. Okay, so we talked about hot and cold media. Okay, and we also have to look at how they use that media. So that will help you as you're building your game. If you're putting a new game together with a new IP, be thinking ahead of time, will people want to see books about this? For example, people now want to see cyberpunk books. But when I wrote the original Cyberpunk, even though there are cyberpunk novels out there, they run by Time Warner, as a matter of fact, no one really bought them. And a large part of that was, well, there was a lot of other better cyberpunk out there. And also, there were a lot of people out there who didn't know about that audience, about cyberpunk at all. We had to educate people on how to even understand that concept. So you can't always assume that one medium works to the other. We were lucky. Because we came in on a literary wave of it, we were able to make characters that work further and work better. Okay? But it's interesting, for example, watching the transition now between 2077, which is a very visual structure, in which if you ask somebody, what does, Johnny Silverhand look like? He looks like Keanu Reeves, of course. Well, he didn't. He was kind of blonde, and I can adapt. I mean, Keanu Reeves, come on, guys. When they told me that, I was like, whoa, okay, whoa. So basically, that's actually a little story we'll tell about that idea of adaptation. Okay, so you have to look at how people are going to basically be your audience. You need to find a sweet spot where you can get the maximum audience that you can work with. The guy in the sweet spot in the middle, the point in the sweet spot in the middle between TV, movies, comics, books, and games, where there's a particular quality that people really like, okay? And you need to figure out how to translate that. In Dragon Ball, people want to see people fly up, make long speeches, and power up for like 4 days. Dragon Ball worked really well in manga, but I remember when we were doing the license for Dragon Ball, I was kind of going, all right, it doesn't work really well for a role-playing game. Because, okay, your character, yeah, okay, I roll, okay. I attack Vegeta, okay, power up. Okay, so come back in the next session, and we'll find out how power up you are, Your key is now up by 30%. Oh, man, I hate this game. Remember, the audiences are different, okay? So when you design this, think about sweet spots. What can I throw to each audience that doesn't imperil getting another audience? And if I'm in video games, how do I get something that will be visual enough for TV and movies? How am I going to get something that could go down to books or games? Witcher is a really good example of when you don't get that right or you do get that right, because Witcher in Europe is all about the books. Witcher in the rest of the world is all about the video game. So when the TV show from Netflix started getting worked on, everybody went, okay, they're going to do it around the books. And everybody who had played the video game went, oh, this is going to suck. And I have to say, one of the big steps that they did is, it looks fairly good now, is that the actor, Henry Cavill, loved the game. And that's what brought him into it. And then he read all the books. So when you listen to him in his dialogue, he sounds like Geralt straight out of the video game. You can put him side by side and go, hey, wait a minute. Is that Conkle? Yeah, okay. So that was a thing in that sweet spot that people wanted to see. And that got TV people and video game people to go, okay, that's not going to be too bad. Oh, yeah, I want to see Henry Cavill. Oh, yeah, this isn't really embarrassing. Oh, this is a lot like the books. Okay, see what we're saying now? Everybody got that? Know where you're going to go. Know what your audience is, okay? Good, I got to keep moving here. Okay, make sure that when you're doing that you don't alienate one audience for another, unless you know that, unless you've made that conscious choice. If I'm doing Star Wars, and I've worked on Star Wars stuff, both paper and in digital, I know what ought to be there. And I have a good feeling of what's going to honk people off if I don't have that there. If, there are certain rules about how a Jedi do things. Jedi comes in, hey, I'm Jedi Bob. Want to go hang out? That's, and people go, Jedi don't do that. Okay. That's part of the problem they're having now with Last Jedi, is they're trying to change a formula that one particular audience wants, and that's the movie audience. But a lot of what you're seeing Last Jedi to the book audiences, they're like, yeah, this again? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember that book over here. Vonda McIntyre did it. Luke got really pissed off and he left and this happened, and So they're primed for it. So you need to look at that. The other thing you have to look at is types of interactions within the media. Video games, for example, are about hidden knowledge, okay? That means there's a lot of things, the mechanics and all that are, you don't see them. They're just going on, cha-ching, 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 and you go, okay, I shoot 3 of the flood, and they fall over, and I'm not looking at all the algorithms behind. And when I was teaching, my first years had a lot of problems with that. They go, well, why are we studying video games? I'm going, because, or why are we studying tabletop games? Because everything you do in a video game is a tabletop game that somebody hid from you. They hid the mechanics. They hid that table that said, at 500 feet, you need to roll a 5. That was invisible. So, but if you did that, it would be really boring. You'd be stopping and going, okay, so instead of my just, it's like, roll a 4. Oh, man. So even in a role-playing game, those mechanics that would be exposed in a tabletop game need to become invisible. If you don't have that for tabletop or some of the other games, what happens is people feel cheated because they want to know how you got there. So when you are doing your game, particularly in a licensed property, you need to look at it and go, how much do they really need to know about what I'm about to do? For example, if I'm doing a Dragon Ball game, I need to have some visual way to tell the player when he is powering up and how much ki he's got. I can't just like say, okay, make an attack. No, because a big chunk of Dragon Ball is, and then, the bar goes up, right? You better have that bar go up. That's important. It's what your audience has come to expect, okay? Guys grunting and having hernias as they build up power. So you need to expose knowledge based on that. So think as you're building your game, how much do I need them to know? And if I'm doing a property, a license and IP, what things do they need to see to know that I have gotten it right and that it's authentic? I need to know that. I need to know what they feel about it, okay? Tabletop games are about exposing the man behind the curtain, but that makes them cooler than video games, okay? When you get to a movie or a TV show, that may have very, very little depth to it. There may not be a man behind the curtain. Everything may be hidden. We don't know what Luke Skywalker's power level is. Or can Luke Skywalker beat Goku? Well, we don't know. There's no way to measure that. When I worked in Dragon Ball, it's fun because we went, okay, so we're working in this system. Can Krillin fight Superman? Okay, how are we going to measure that? And that was important for a game, okay? So you need to know how much you're going to tell to your audience either way, whatever form you put it into. You have to explain that in some way. Okay. And a lot of times that exposure isn't just the rules, it's about the world environment. I'll give you a great one. We were doing a Star Wars paper game supplement, Dave Ackerman and I, and we went, okay, so, we're trapped on a space station and this is happening. Okay, so we'll arrange that the players can sneak out of the bathroom window and not be caught by the stormtroopers. And we suddenly stopped and went, are there bathrooms in Star Wars? Nowhere in the movie does Luke say, hey, wait a minute, I got to go take a piss. Okay, Luke, not again. Come on, man. We've been fighting stormtroopers all day. My back teeth are floating. All right. Doesn't happen. You don't need to know. And to be honest, I don't want to. So when you're dealing with that, remember that certain areas you can over-explain. You can tell people things they may not need to know in your game. So look at how much is told from the IP and judge accordingly. In other words, take it from the form you will do in a video game where they have to know something about it, like what your power level is, how much force do you still have, whatever, which they will never think about in the movie. But you need to quantify that because as a cooler and cooler medium, people will want to interact more with it. And if you don't think about that, as the mediums get cooler, they will start filling in the gaps, okay? And we're going to get that in a couple seconds. The other thing you want to look at as you're talking about an IP is you're going to look at what's called mind share. Mind share, or also the Zeitgeist, for those of you who took philosophy in class, the feeling of the times. Basically, Zeitgeist or mind share is people already invested in parts of whatever you're doing. So, for example, Star Wars is brilliant because it is a fairy tale, and every one of us started off with our parents telling us some fairy tales. It's a Western, which means you got guys with fast guns and the whole bit like that, and it's a war movie. So, Lucas didn't have to invent a whole new thing. He just had to find a way to take several different pieces that were in people's mind share. Wow, I really like Han Solo. He's like a gunslinger. And Boba Fett is another gunslinger. And I know about gunslingers because, I saw those old Westerns. Cool. Okay, so that actually made it kind of fun when we had to work on these projects because we go, okay, so are we going for the fairy tale side or are we going to go for, more gunfighter or whatever? Okay? So you need to know the mind share. How many people in your audiences are invested in what you're doing? What do they like about what you're doing? How can you deliver it to your audience in your game? If they liked the book, you need to make it feel enough like the book if that's your big audience. If they liked it more as the movie, what was in the movie? And how do you get that without alienating the guys who only saw the books? You want to, in the end, be in that really sweet spot, okay? And one of the places, we're running tight here, good. One of the things that's changed that's made this even more perilous is Fandom. Fandom is terrifying. They are now a factor in transferring IP between mediums. In the old days, if I liked something, I got together with my friends and maybe, everybody in town who was into that, and we'd occasionally hang out. And if we got lucky, there was a convention. And, when I first started gaming, it was like, they're gaming conventions. Are you kidding? People get together and they play D&D? Whoa, that's heavy, dude. So the thing is that fandoms now are linked. So people across the globe know different things, and they have a general world assumption. They have a mind share on a property you may have to work on, okay? And you need to know that, okay? They allow the audience to turn a relatively warm media where they're just like swallowing it, instead into really cool invested media. For example, way the hell back, you could watch Star Trek and you could go, yeah, that's really cool. But as we got fandoms and Star Trek conventions, you started getting people who were dressing up as Klingons. So that meant that as they did the next iteration, which would have been Next Generation, you had to make Klingons cooler because people were now investing in Klingons. Meme economy, invest in Klingons. You have to basically make things transition to where the fandom is a lot of times without blowing what you're doing all to heck, okay? But it can change a really warm medium where they're just swallowing it down to where now people are doing fan films that are darn near the quality of any of the TV shows. Those sorts of powers are in their hands. And that's really interesting because what it means is when you do something, if you don't get a good translation of it, somebody's going to say, well, I thought that sucked. So we're doing another version. You may find your game blown out of the water by someone's unauthorized game that they did better. There are several really interesting cases of that. My favorite is the no cheese Star Wars edit. Anybody hear of that ever? I don't know if they got out here. Somebody decided a lot of the prequel stuff had a lot of cheesy stuff in there, like Jar Jar Binks. So they edited things and rewrote it and went through, and for example, Jar Jar now speaks in some kind of, other alien language, and he has subtitles because, well, he's an alien dude, right? Nobody translated Greedo having him talk. So suddenly it got cooler. Well, the problem is if you're working on these properties and we're having to come up with something and Maximum George is going, yeah, I want you to get Jar Jar Binks in there. My audience has just told me, Jar Jar Binks sucks. We never want to see that. How do I get away with this? Because Maximum George is going to fire me. Okay, would not be good. So strong fandoms are cool because they generate tons of content. I must confess, for example, many years ago when I was in college, my old girlfriend actually did the first Kirk Spock /Fic magazine. Yes, my old girlfriend is responsible for Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock having an affair. And she'd be printing these things out, and I'd be going, you really believe that? It's wonderful. I think I know why we broke up. So basically, but that, if you think about it now, that sort of thing drives fans. Don't laugh. You can see fans now generating all kinds of content. One of the best companies, in fact, for working with that is Hasbro. Hasbro is really good at recognizing what they can do to harness their fandoms, okay? But even they have problems when they get rabid fandoms. So you get My Little Pony. My Little Pony fascinated me because I'm sitting there and I watched it show up on 4chan. I went, this is going to last about 50 seconds. Ponies, right? But I watched, and it was like art and music and games and all this stuff. And they were just, I would look on some of the image boards and I go, there's 200 pieces of art here. What the heck? So you have to understand that, they're generating content. And that tells me something. That tells me what their interests are. But on the other hand, when someone changes one of the characters, like gives her wings or something like that, suddenly people are going, death threats, you changed my waifu. Like, dude, it's a cartoon horse, okay? Cartoon horse, death threats are not necessary, okay? So you have to work with that and understand, once again, that sweet spot. So when you have changes like what I talked about with Witcher, if Geralt had been done really a lot like the books, then he would have looked very different, look more like Elric. And everybody who had ever seen a video game would go, that's not Geralt. But they picked a sweet spot where Henry Cavill looks enough like what they expect for the millions of people who have never seen the books. By the way, I do recommend the books. They're great. My son also did a role-playing game on the books. And what's interesting is he had to figure out how to get that to work with what was in the books and what was in the video game. And it was basically bad because, we'd go to conventions in Poland where, this is serious, and we didn't want someone to say, you changed Geralt, we are now going to kill you. Mob pulls out pitchforks. Cody and I start running. But that was finding that sweet spot again. We got something that worked for what everybody saw, okay? Sometimes you can use those fans as guides. For example, in Transformers, I was fascinated by the fact that Hasbro looked at what people started writing about, and they started looking at a lot of the knockoff products, and they would go, okay, so we were never going to do this character, but the fans really liked it, so some guy in Hong Kong made a version of that character as a Transformer. So he did all the work for us. He proved that there was an audience out there for this weird character, and he sold, 200,000 of them or something. We could sue him, or we could copy it and start making 2 million of that weird character. And everyone's prime. It's now mind share, okay? But if you screw up, you get the Battle of Transformers G1, which I lived through as a younger person. A friend of mine worked on basically the animal form Transformers, okay? And I remember he was in the middle of the monkey, not truck, truck, not monkey wars. Everybody's forgotten it now because everyone's like, 95 years old. But it was like, no, Optimus Prime is a truck, not a monkey. No, now he's a monkey. No, people would be, literally go to conventions and they would wear T-shirts. They were like, So occasionally, if you don't know how to deal with him, your fandoms can teach you, they can help you, or they can be straitjackets. Like, My Little Pony, tons and tons of content. And the moment they said, oh, well, let's make this character a princess because we're going to sell out of princess castles, everybody went, my headcanon, she's supposed to marry so-and-so, and I wrote all these fanfics, and you're thinking, yeah, I should ignore this, but I'm not going to because my audience has just told me what they want to see. Now, whether I want to do that or not is a whole other thing. But Hasbro, for example, got very good at that, okay? Star Trek, on the other hand, didn't get good at it. So Star Trek sat around and was fallow, nothing happened. And then they started doing new Star Trek, and they did the Star Trek movies, and everybody went, oh my God, what have they done to Star Trek? Like the bridge is nothing but Klieg lights. I can't see. And I was fascinated because the casting, except for Kirk, which, come on, do you think you ever get anybody to replace William Shatner doing James T. Kirk? No, it's not going to happen. So they went for a different Kirk. But other than that, the casting was just amazing. You know, I said they brought back DeForest Kelley from the dead, and he's really good looking. So their problem was it didn't look enough like the larger audience share, which was movies and TV, for people to be able to swallow it. So there was a lot of problems with that. That's not my Star Trek. That's new Trek. And everybody found every reason in the world to hate it. And, you know, now that it's been discontinued, they're all going, yes, we won. Well, you don't want that. You don't want a broken base. Who here doesn't know what a broken base is? Yes, when two groups of fandoms or many groups of fandoms start fighting. Right. So, yeah, you don't want that, okay? What you're aiming for instead is you want to find a way to keep people happy without, you know, buying into it too much, because when they do, they stop helping you and they start being a problem, okay? And when you pitch your IP towards something, you're going to look at it and go, okay, how much can they do to make this cool so they get heavy investment? For example, I am utterly blown away now at the fact that for a game that isn't even out yet, there are people cosplaying characters in 77. You know, I just ended up, you know, in two different countries judging cosplay of people playing Johnny Silverhand and putting amazing amounts of effort into that. And I'm going, guys, I really appreciate the vote of confidence, but, you know, maybe you should wait till the game is at least out. What if we change Johnny's hair back to blonde? You guys are all going to be mad at us, right? So, but that involvement you want to get when you're looking at essentially how you're dealing with that Venn diagram, okay? So you want them to be there. You just don't want them to run things into the ground or tell you how to do it. And you don't want to wake up one morning and find someone's got a Reddit post saying, this is where his house is, let's go burn it down, because they will do that. Okay. Sometimes you get lucky, though. A change in media can resurrect an IP by shifting. For example, Star Wars was a movie IP, and you did Star Wars games, and some of them were really good. But for example, you know, Knights of the Old Republic, beautiful game, wonderful game, but they stepped off a cliff and did something really different than the movies, and that was because the movie-based games at the time, like X-Wing and so forth like that, they were kind of trash. You know, even as arcade games, I would go and go, this is it. I just went through that level. I just blew up the Death Star. This sucks. But I got to Coder, and I went, okay, I'm going to play this once. No, I'm going to play it another time. No, I'm going to play it again. You know, this time I'll do evil. What happened there was they brought in new things into that IP. Star Wars was dead. When I started doing stuff with it way the hell back, it took the Timothy Zahn books. Okay, so that's another media form. Okay, so we had to go all the way from TV and movies, and we had to go all the way down to the cool medium of books and games, of which games was, for me, West End Games doing the Star Wars role-playing game. Now, this could be really interesting sometimes because, you know, at the time Star Wars was so dead that they were looking to us for ideas. So at that point, the licensing person over at Lucasfilm, Mickey Herman, really nice woman, you know, we'd say, well, we want to be able to do this. Like, Lando Calrissian lost the Millennium Falcon, so he needs a ship. We want to invent a yacht for him called the Lady Luck. Okay, I'll run it by Maximum George. Yeah, George, at that point, doesn't care. He's doing Howard the Duck. And he'll say, yeah, cool. So next thing you know, Lando Calrissian has a space yacht. One of the proudest moments of my life was walking to a Toys R Us, you know, a few years later and seeing Micro Machines, Lady Luck, Lando Calrissian's yacht. Yeah, we did that. But that's important because changing the media changed the nature of who was going to be the immediate audience. And they were going to read the books, and the book people would invent new ideas, and the game people would be running role-playing games that they had to think about where the bathrooms were, that George never had to do. Okay? So West End gave it new life. Timothy Zahn, in books, kicked it back to life. But once you got back to the higher end of the pyramid, the people who were tied up around the movies were much more opinionated about it. So, as I said earlier in this talk, people who kind of went, looked at Last Jedi and they went, oh yeah, well, in the books, Luke's been doing stuff like that forever. Remember the Night Witches of Dathomir? Oh yeah, But the book people were a different audience, and that needed to be dealt with. Okay. Contrary, for example, the Timothy Zahn books created a character called Thrawn, the big bad, who's like this just Sherlock Holmes blue admiral dude who can read their minds almost. And everybody went, that character's cool. Well, they brought him really well into the animated series, and suddenly Thrawn is the only thing in the alternate canon that has survived. So, if we ever go back to the just post-Empire period, we're probably going to see Thrawn because he brought something into the IP. That's what feeding back and forth can do for your product and for your IP, okay? So we got lucky with Cyberpunk because we've always had a big fan base, but that was a big fan base for RPGs, which is not a lot of people, okay? But the change in media exposed the IP to a really much larger audience. So, maybe 10,000 people worldwide knew who Johnny Silverhand was. Now, I think everyone, including, I have no idea. Everybody seems to know, like, Johnny Silverhand. Oh, damn, I should have written him better. But the upshot is that shift exposed a bigger audience. One of the things we had to do when I worked with CDPR, and I still work with them, in fact, we have an ongoing conversation about how the characters progress, what the timelines are, what happens when. There's an existing timeline we've built that goes all the way up past 77, and I pretty much know where all the characters were, and they know, and occasionally they'll say, well, we need to have this character over here. And I'll go, okay, so let's see if we can get him over here from this, okay? That really makes that product stronger because now people who are excited for the game, they can't get enough information. But every day, for example, our social media director puts up one of his 365 days of Cyberpunk posts on Reddit. And everybody goes, ooh, cyber animals. I didn't know about that. That's cool. We heard somebody came in once and they went, there's a street gang made up of clowns, the Bozos. That sounds really stupid. I hope that's not in there. And then Jay posted an actual background of Bozos, which are like, they make the Joker look like a friendly guy. They're really scary. And, their idea of like a nice prank is like, dropping spiders on you and filling the elevator with water before you can get out. And then just before you drown, electrifying you. And then just before you die, opening the elevator and you fall out. And there's a Bozo standing and goes, and then leaves you there half dead. Horrible. So within 1 week, everybody went, oh my God, I hope the Bozos are in there. They're really scary. Hope I can play a Bozo. Dude, really? You do know their feet are not shoes. They're actually bioengineered giant cyber feet. That's even better. Okay, so what we got was we were able to ride that sweet spot between the people who had played the game for all those years and the people who wanted to see a particular game style and feel and be able to progress that. And that was a good transition for us. So let's sum up. We got 52 seconds. Okay, IP can also often make a successful transition to other media, but it requires, one, a solid knowledge of the IP and why it was popular. You got to know it. You can't just go, yeah, well, Star Trek, it ought to be changed. You better pay attention because they came there for some kind of Star Trek, okay? A solid understanding of the audience for each incarnation. You need to know why they will play your game, and that means finding out, particularly if the thing has been in multiple media, what each incarnation of that media, of that IP, attracted them and why. Why did they get behind it? Okay, you need to know that. And I've been in projects where, some guy would, we always get this with marketing. Some guy would swan in and go, yeah, we should change that and this. This is a really dumb idea. I just saw this thing over here that they were doing, and we ought to, do it like that. And I'd go, guys, hang on. Guys, that's really a dumb idea, and just because you saw it in Destiny is probably not a good idea in this game. I've dealt with that. Okay, you will deal with it too. Half of you who become leads, I'll tell you the hot truth, a large part of your job will be keeping the vision and making sure marketing doesn't mess with it. One of the nice things about working with CD is marketing stays out of the way. It's a creative-driven shop. And when I go to say, that's a really dumb idea, they listen to what I'm saying because they know I know the IP better than they ever will. Okay? You need to know the weaknesses and strengths of each media type and which ones will work best with the IP. Sometimes you're going to get a really great idea for a license, and then you're going to go, but how am I going to implement that? Somebody will come up to you and say, I've got this really great, thing that Sandra Bullock's doing with, Keanu Reeves, and it's a romantic comedy, and I've got the rights to do it, and you're going, how do I do a rom-com as a video game? I know, he shoots hearts at her, and then, no, that's not going to work, dude. So know the limitations. It'll keep you from buying really stupid IPs because they're hot. You'll know this will make a sucky game. So I'd better not do it. On the other hand, if you can figure out, for example, with the Kardashian game, that what people really want to do is do dress up. They wanted to be able to say, wow, I'm going to be dressing my character in these really cool clothes and going to these really cool places that I will never be able to do. Okay? Turns out people like dress up. I used to laugh because at one point there was a game called Dead or Alive. And, basically people, would fight various characters, one-on-one and so forth. And they did DOA beach basketball. And I was there, we were premiering it over Microsoft, and I was kind of going, this sounds really embarrassing. And I was fascinated because, you got these, animated girls hitting basketballs and all that. And then they would get points. And then these rugged dudes would be going, all right, I got enough points to buy that new bikini. Yeah, I'm thinking about those shoes. And I'm going, and I'm standing there next to my, my boss. I'm going, so what we've got is a bunch of rugged dudes who, have all kinds of issues about masculinity who are playing Barbie dress up. Right. So your IP can be a lot of things. Know what it should be and have a good time when you're doing it. Okay, so I'm going to answer questions for as long as Roberta will not throw me out of here. Okay, thanks for coming, by the way, and I'll take some questions.
Okay, please let me know if you have any questions. I'll share with you the microphone.
Come on, don't be chicken, kids. I came 6,000 miles.
Okay. Were there other difficulties when transitioning Cyberpunk, which was a tabletop and a book, into a video game media?
It was less difficult because, one, I work in the field. So having worked in both ends of it, for example, AVs, I could sit down with the lead on that and say, you don't want to do AVs, the flying cars like this. In fact, if you can avoid it, don't. Why did I say that? Well, basically because I had worked on flight sim for like 2 projects, and I knew how hard it was to do a good flying game. And I said, you'll spend half of your time getting the AVs to fly right. Don't do this. So one of the advantages was, since I could go where they needed to go, and they, as fans, because these guys knew more about this stuff than I remembered sometimes, we could meet in the middle. And, we have times when, things don't make sense, like the original idea of having it all happen in cities under the ice, which I killed, thank God. But beyond that, yeah, we actually are pretty simpatico because we know each other's jobs. Next
Thank you.
victim.
Yes, I can go.
You.
I have a few, but I'll ask one that just came to my mind. What about what about translating from what about stuff like sports games and that kind of medium and the mind share of that kind of this is so odd.
Well, I mean, my favorite was a guy I hired a couple of years back who had come to me and he did wrestling games. And, that sounds dumb. Wrestling games make an insane amount of money, but you never hear about it. I had to deal with the sports group and, the EA sports group. So it was like, I knew they made a lot of money, but why does that work? Well, wrestling has characters, and I want to care about what The Rock does, even if it's a scripted encounter. So sports games can have, Forza. I love Forza just because I get to own cars I'll never get to own. I can get out there and go, hey, this is the best I'll ever do to get Maserati. They don't pay me that much. I wish they did, but they don't. Next. Come on, guys.
Okay, microphone.
You got me for exactly one more day. Do this.
Hello. Okay, so you said that you had a lot of input for Cyberpunk 2077.
Yep.
And I was just wondering, the World War Z author, when his movie came out, he said he had no input on it. So I was wondering, what's the percentage of creators that actually have input when their IP is actually transferred to another medium?
I couldn't really speak to it a lot. I don't know a lot of people who have gone through that transition. Actually, I know George R. R. Martin, but he knows games, and so he didn't have a lot of problems, and he knew sort of where to back off from Game of Thrones. But I doubt that he had more than an advisory role, because what they needed to do for TV was going to be different, and that's why his books went one way and the show went another way.
One more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You said previously about the dangers of fandom, burning your house down and shit like that. But basically, what about if... So the fandom kind of can change how the medium is viewed. So will that actually affect how the creator views his own work? Can that make them potentially worried about changing it, in worry that the fandom will lash out at them, for example?
You have to decide where you're going to stand your ground. There's a thing called death of the author, which is when the fandom decides they know it better than you do. And that is always a risk. At some point you have to say, yeah, I did write it like this, and this is what's going to happen. What you tend to find, in my experience, is if you stand there and say, no, I wrote this, and no, you don't get to decide, the majority of people who came there who were interested in what you created will back you. There will always be somebody who thinks they could write it better than you. And the argument, of saying, well, you go write one, usually it's like, well, I shouldn't have to. No, you don't know what we had to do to get here. So it's easy for you to decide it should be a certain way. But just like you guys got a full lecture on how to deal with an IP today, there's a fan out there who never did that and is going to make decisions, and many of them will be disastrous because it's knowledge, not just will.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you want to ask a question? Okay.
Okay, and then you don't get to move around the audience
Yes,
anymore.
I know,
all right?
I know.
Don't make me come up there. I will
I-
smack you.
I had this in the back of my mind. You
I've been a
talked about-
parent.
you
I know
talked-
this.
You talked about how going from harder media to colder media have a lot of things to consider. But what about within the same medium, there's different degrees of hardness? And one example would be the adaptation of Fallout when Bethesda bought them from one type of RPG to another type of RPG. And what are your thoughts on that kind of transition?
You can sort of tell a lot of that in Fallout because, a lot of the problems people had with the changes in medium show up there. People get used to this is Fallout. It's a certain way. And that's what they're looking for. And so, like 76 right now, a big chunk of 76 is they missed why you play Fallout entirely. And we won't get into all of the other stuff like the DLC and Okay, I'm getting upset. But the upshot is, yeah. If you're going to change your transition, remember that inside of media, your audience has certain expectations, and you owe them a certain amount because they're paying money for it to listen. But again, as I told the previous questioner, you also have to know when to stand pat and say, yeah, we're going to do it like this, because if it really bothers them, they're going to go out and they're going to go make a version anyway, and we'll see whether their version worked. One of my favorite was Hasbro, My Little Pony, which is cute and fluffy and all that, and somebody said, well, I'm going to do a fighting game. So Pony 1 and Pony 2 are going to beat the crap out of each other. This is going to go over really big in Pawtucket.
Thank you, Mike. We know his name is Mike, but we don't even know your name. You'll be the last one because we do have other things to present for today's event. Okay, please intro yourself and do stand up.
Hi, Max. I'm Siming. I'm wondering, since you talk about fandoms, what is your favorite fandom and what do you like most about them?
Oh, man. I don't have a favorite fandom. I drift around through fandoms. Weirdly enough, like I said, I tracked My Little Pony because of one thing. I actually saw it when it began. I was on 4chan. I went, oh, my God, ponies, what? And so you rarely have a chance to see a fandom grow all the way to the end of the series and see all the phases. So I'm going in like making notes. I'm going, okay, so now we have Broken Base. Okay, so now we have Death of the Author, and I almost wrote a research paper on it because it was fascinating. I had been involved in Star Trek fandoms, sort of, but again, I was an outsider, and I now wish when my girlfriend, for example, had done the first Kirk Spock thing, that I had taken some notes. I could have written a paper in college, I was a psych major. How people invest in the Star Trek milieu and how they perceive fan relationships in, da-da-da-da. So, yeah, I don't have a favorite fandom. I'm more an observer. I look at stuff. I guess if I'm a fan at anything, it's Transformers. And that's because, well, I like Transformer toys. They're really relaxing. You're bored out of your tree. You've just done a tremendous amount of work. And you go, yeah, okay, well, I'll just have to fold this, move that into there. Yeah, okay. Oh, damn, I broke that. I used to, just as a side note, I remember we had a team that was really fighting. One group was up against the other group. And I was lead, and I'm going, how are we going to get these guys to, quit fighting? So I walked into the meeting with a combiner transformer. Okay? And it, you had, I think it was one of the ones with 5 planes and 6 jets or, whatever. And I just threw it down in pieces on the table, and everybody's like, and they're all staring at each other. And then they all kind of start picking up pieces and looking at them, and they change them into robots, and they change them back to airplanes and cars and helicopters and dragons or whatever. And then they realize if they are going to put the whole robot together, they got to talk to the guys across the table. So by the end of the meeting, surreptitiously, it's like, well, you got the legs. All right, you can have the legs, but only if you let me have the middle. All right. So they put the robot together, and they all chilled out, and the team was able to work some more. And I said, score. I'm less of a fan than an observer. I don't think I really have one. Actually, I do have one that amuses me, which is a character called Flufflepuff. That's a fan character, and that's only because she reminds me of a friend of mine an awful lot. She has a kind of bounce. And I always say, yeah, you remind me of that character Flufflepuff, But I don't really have a favorite pony. I'm not that deep into it. Everybody was going, oh my God, the series is over. And I'm taking notes going, what will they do now that the series is over?
Okay, now we have the last question for you, Mike.
Hi, I'd like to ask, how dangerous can fan theories get, and when do you decide to stop, intervene into?
Well,
fan
you guys
theories?
are really into the fan thing here. I should have done that as my seminar. I think most fandoms, it depends. It's I don't really join fandoms that much, but I remember when the Sonic the Hedgehog fandom started going, it was like everybody on the internet, even on 4chan, they'd say, don't go into the Sonic fandom boards. You'll die. The toxicity will kill you. And I'm more interested in what people do in these situations. I kind of like to study people for that. Well, again, fans are your audience. They are just something that's a new audience because we now have ways for people to communicate instead of being alone. So that makes them a very potent audience, but it also means that it's an audience that you have to be aware of and know where your limits are and their limits are. And it works when everybody understands that they're not necessarily the creators or that they cannot do everything they think they want to do. So it's a dance. And I
Thank you.
think, okay. So thanks everybody for coming and listening to me bore you for 2 hours or whatever.
We were never bored. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Okay, thanks.